Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever in the planet you are. You're most welcome to this event, what we are organizing together with UNDP Finland and Fingo, which is the national platform for development organizations. So we are talking today about the Human Development Report 2020. My name is Rilli Lappalainen. I'm the Director of Sustainable Development in Fingo, which is really the national platform for development organizations. And I'm really happy and honored to be your host today in this session. 30 years ago, Human Development Report was started in the first time. It still remains a powerful voice. The current and embedded crises in ecological, health, political, and economic systems have become more and more evident every day, and we have a lot of examples on that. So this current report, with the title "The Next Frontier: Human Development and the Anthropocene," introduces an experimental new lenses to its annual Human Development Index. That index which measures of nations' health, education, and standards of living. But in this time, there are two new components included in the report. The first one is the country's carbon dioxide emissions, and the second element is its material footprint. And looking into the future, how can we really reimagine the human development so it encompasses the global trends, such like the technology, which we're witnessing every day, or the global challenges, likely uneven development, deepening inequalities, or the climate change? And how can we ensure the well-being of the people and the planet in a fair way, both here, of course, in Finland, but also, and very much in the global years as well? So today, this webinar, what we are having together, we also wanted to hear you as a participant, and I'm really inviting you to join. All of you know how the Zoom works, so there are the box where to put your questions, so please do so. But also use the social media, so we are using the hashtag HDR2020. So please tell the rest of the world what we have discussed today. But further ado, I think we could really start with the great message from Finnish Minister for Environment and Climate Change, who kindly make the pre-recorded remarks for us. And I think that's a good start for our deep discussions. So over to Minister's video remarks.
Dear colleagues and friends, the government of Finland welcomes UNDP's experimental approach to the annual Human Development Index, where planetary pressures have been used to adjust it. The message is clear. Rich countries have achieved their human development and social well-being at the cost of the environment. Although we have not done this intentionally, the UN Youth Envoy expressed it clearly. We have simply taken our planet for granted. Finland is one of the countries whose ranking drops when the assessment includes carbon dioxide emissions and materials consumption. We are not surprised by this. Our government has worked hard to change its course and make our environmental and climate policies more ambitious. But we also need a revolution in the way we think about the economy. I'm happy to inform you that in Finland, we have just recently adopted a new strategic program to promote a circular economy by 2035. I'm especially proud that Finland's government has now set objectives for the use of natural resources. For example, by year 2035, the domestic total consumption of primary raw materials will not exceed the 2015 level. These objectives complement the government's climate neutrality target by 2035. Not a single country has achieved a high level of well-being in an ecologically sustainable way. As the UNDP report makes clear, we need to transform our relationship with the planet. We have to ensure that our future generations can also enjoy our planet's ecosystem services and have a good life. I believe that the systemic transition to a circular economy is an excellent strategy. It serves as a tool to guide Finland and other countries towards a climate-neutral, resource-smart, inclusive and just society.
Thank you, Minister's message. I think that it was really giving the good guidance for our next discussions, and really keep that please on mind when we are really reflecting in the end after the Q&A session. So that was really good start for that. But definitely, of course, we are keen on knowing what really is in the report, and I'm really happy to welcome Pedro Conceição, who is the director and lead author of the Human Development Report 2020, and he is now giving us the short introduction to this report. So Pedro, floor is yours.
Thank you, Rilli. It's a pleasure to be joining all of you, and I look forward to the discussion. And because the discussion is the most important part of the time we'll spend together today, I'll try to be rather brief. And I want to start with what is perhaps the central message of the report. As we continue to confront the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, development trends that seemingly are going into the reverse, what the report does is to invite all of us to look at these challenges less as separate problems and more as reflections of an unprecedented moment in our history and the history of our planet. The moment is unprecedented because human pressures on the planet are driving dangerous planetary change to an extent that has been described or characterized as a new geological epoch, the Anthropocene. And what it implies is the emergence of an unprecedented set of risks that are of our own making. We people are making, generating these risks, and that are harming us already, as well as all life on our planet. So COVID-19 could be an illustration of the kind of risks that we confronted. It's very likely that the virus has jumped from animals to humans. And we do know that there's been an increase in the frequency of these zoonotic diseases, and that also that is increasing the frequency of these diseases, which have happened throughout human history, is a direct result of this increase in planetary pressures. So we heard from the minister about climate change, but the report is really an invitation to see a range of different challenges, which we could have biodiversity loss, as a reflection of this broader process of dangerous planetary change that results from the planetary pressures that we humans are putting on the planet. So let me briefly elaborate on three key points from the report. First, to say a few words about the challenge. Then secondly, how to reframe the goal of development or advancing development, if you will. And then finally, perhaps the most important, the way forward, ideas on the way forward. So the challenge, first point, the challenge is that we are not only facing a new type of risks, but these risks are superimposed on a world with large and often growing inequalities. And that these inequalities in turn are often exacerbated by these risks. So to go back to COVID-19, we do know that economic impact has been far worse for women than for men, in part because women are overrepresented in those economic sectors that have been more affected, but perhaps more concerning because social norms about the role of women in homework and childcare have reasserted themselves. And so we observe around the world that many women are pulling back from the labor force. In the report, we document that in some countries, we have seen drops of as much as 10 percentage points in the labor force participation rate of women, in just a few months. And this represents a reverse of progress that actually had taken decades to achieve. But these patterns actually hold more broadly. If you look at the numbers on this slide, you see that countries that face more ecological threats, droughts, floods, storms, are also those where gender inequality is higher. And if we look at inequality in human development more broadly, we see that the pattern is repeated. The pattern is very much the same. Now, inequalities are also linked to dangerous planetary change, given that there are asymmetries in consumption and in power between those that over-extract and over-pollute and those bearing the consequences. It's very important when we speak of the concept of the Anthropocene and this notion that humans are driving dangerous planetary change, that humanity is not a homogeneous entity, that there are significant differences, asymmetries, inequalities, not only in bearing the burden, as I illustrated earlier, but also in the contributions that different groups of people make to this dangerous planetary change. So what these numbers show on this slide is that by the end of this century, the poorest countries in the world, where those that have contributed the least to climate change, could experience up to 100 days more of extreme temperature, while richer countries, very high human development, are those that have historically contributed the most and could actually experience 18 days less of extreme temperature. We also know that this is not inevitable, though. The blue lines show that those 100 days could be cut in half if we were to make choices that would get us closer to meeting the aspirations of the Paris Agreement on climate change. So my second point is that if we frame choices by bringing our embeddedness in nature forward to the core, the goal of advancing human development, which remains vital and central, should be supplemented by being mindful also of the planetary pressures that we're putting on our planet. Because otherwise, the very notion of human development for many today, and perhaps for everyone in the future, will be foreclosed. So if we compare a country's human development index represented in the horizontal axis in this chart by the Human Development Index and planetary pressures, an index of planetary pressures on the vertical axis, we define an aspirational destination for high human development and low planetary pressures as the green triangle that you see here on this figure. And if you plot different countries, these dots represent how different countries fare when it comes to human development, the Human Development Index, and the Index of Planetary Pressures, you see that at the present, there is no country that is occupying that aspirational space at the bottom right-hand corner of the slide. So the goal would be for all countries to move more quickly, certainly in advancing human development, but at the same time easing planetary pressure. So this is a redefinition, if you will, my second point of the goal. Now, it's very important to bring to the fore this idea that human development is not only about well-being. Sometimes the concept of human development is associated exclusively with well-being, which is certainly important. But core to the idea of human development is also the concept of giving people agency, conditions to make different choices. And so this brings me to the last point on the way forward. And the report highlights three mechanisms, we call them mechanisms of change, that enable and encourage people to make different choices. And we framed these three aspects as mechanisms of change, as opposed to direct recommendations for governments or businesses or civil society, because in organizing the mechanisms for change, for action, for different choices around these instruments, we believe that we would find a way for different entities, different actors to find their own space and find their own role in advancing different choices and change. So the first mechanism for change has to do with social norms. And as we have seen over the last few months, how quickly social norms around things like wearing masks or over the last few years, smoking in shared spaces, norms can change quite rapidly. And so we must now seek to establish social norms that give greater weight to easing planetary pressures. In fact, there's already some evidence that in the context of the pandemic, there's been an increase of internet searches on terms like recycling and reusing, which suggests that there's perhaps an opportunity or a growing awareness in the context of the crisis we're confronting, all of us, to seek changes in social norms that are important determinants of people's behavior and people's choices. Secondly, second mechanism of change has to do with prices and regulation, which we know well can be used to encourage action or to deter action in different directions. So prices and regulations can shift economic incentives that shape what people consume, what firms produce, what kind of investments are made. And when it comes to prices, it's important not only to account for the damages of planetary pressures, but as important to phase out subsidies that are currently encouraging behavior that goes precisely in the direction of exacerbating planetary pressure. So an example has to do with the fossil fuel subsidies that are encouraging overconsumption of fossil fuels compared to what would happen if we would confront market prices, which in themselves are already imperfect because they don't fully account for the damages of the use of fossil fuels. And the low demand for energy and consequently low oil prices that we confront today may provide a favorable context to phase out these fossil fuel subsidies. And then finally, the third mechanism for change that the report suggests has to do with looking at nature less a constraint, but actually as a potential opportunity to both advance human development while protecting and restoring ecosystems. And here I would go back to this idea that I alluded to earlier of the importance of seeing ourselves not as separate, but actually embedded in our planet and embedded in nature. Now, examples include the blue economy, or how investing in forests, for instance, could account for about a quarter of all the actions that we must take over the next 10 years to meet the targets on emissions agreed to in Paris. And as we do this, protecting forests would also provide livelihoods for many. Now, let me conclude by saying that standing in the way of exercising these choices and activating these mechanisms at scale sometimes are significant imbalances in power and voice. And I'll give an example, which we cite in the report, that according to our estimates, the contribution of indigenous peoples on a per person basis to manage forests that, as we all know, can work as a carbon sink, is roughly equivalent to the carbon dioxide emissions per person of the top 1% of the global income distribution. And these indigenous peoples are often the very people that are already living and have ways of knowing that reflect these embeddedness in nature. They're actually actively protecting nature and are often marginalized, if not discriminated against and persecuted around the world. So ultimately, these inequalities are putting people and planet on a collision course. The United Nations Secretary General at the end of the last year, spoke of a reality in which we are at war with our planet, at war with nature. But it doesn't have to be that way, clearly. We can make different choices, and our aspiration is that this 2020 Human Development Report will help to signpost how to continue to advance human development while easing planetary pressures, moving us towards meeting the SDGs and the aspirations of the 2030 Agenda. So looking forward to the rest of the discussion today. Thank you, Rilli.
Thank you, Pedro. Thank you very much. I think that it's really in a nutshell about the main messages, and definitely I'm really happy to have the conversation later, and I'm really inviting all of you from the audience to really think about the very good questions back to Pedro. But let's move on this program a little bit further, because we have invited 4 panelists as well to give their contributions and discussion points on this common chat what we are having today. And we will do that in that way that we are taking first the 2 first ones and then the second 2 ones. And then after that, we are going to have the opportunity for questions and answers on that. As a reminders as well, that please use the hashtag HDI 2020 as well. So this is the what we can also tell the rest of the world what we are discussing today in this very, very exciting webinar what we are having. Back to the panelists. So in the first part, I'm happy to invite Elina Lehtomäki, who is PhD professor of global education from University of Oulu. And with her, we have Teija Laakso, who is editor-in-chief from maailma.net, which I think is very, very familiar for those who are based in Finland and following about the development news. So you two, perhaps we can start with Elina. And definitely you have really very carefully read the whole report. And my question for you is that what is the biggest news from your point of view on the report? And Elina, because you are somehow representing the academia here, especially from the academic perspective. And then after you, Teija, the similar question, how does it look like with the lenses of the journalist, the report? But first to Elina, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I certainly have read the report and actually mentioned the key message also to my colleagues, because we are doing research on the Anthropocene, which is at the core of the report. And I talked to my biodiversity colleagues and my colleagues in humanities, that what is it that we are doing, how does that relate to the report? And one of the key messages I see there is also that with the biodiversity loss, we also see the loss also in our cultural and social spheres of life, as well as we see the increasing inequality, which was very much highlighted in the report. And I think inequality and biodiversity loss connected to losses we do face in our human environment interactions, we really need to be very careful what we do as academia. And I think in academia, we bear a huge responsibility because we are creating knowledge, we are conducting science in different fields. We have to be able to work in a transdisciplinary way so that we do speak to each other. But more than that, we need to also reach out to citizens and empower, as we heard from the report brief today, people who are engaged do feel the responsibility better. And I think in academia, we creating knowledge and also engaging our students, engaging citizens, collaborating across different sectors, we bear a big responsibility. And when it comes to us working in the global scene, research at the core is often interdisciplinary, but it's also working across borders. So we do reach knowledge from around the world. And this COVID pandemic has shown how important international scientific collaboration is. And that then also brings us back to the academia, that, you know, how do we share this responsibility? How do we make our research also available for everybody throughout the world? And having a big higher education sector, we need to also support those with smaller higher education sectors, because less education easily means also less equality, as we have heard today. But I'll come back to further questions later on. Now over to Teija.
Thank you very much. And then Teija, please.
Thank you. So as a journalist, I I guess the biggest news for me was the index itself, because I was looking for some kind of concrete angle to the whole question. So the biggest news for me was the index in itself, and the fact that the countries that we previously thought are developed are not so developed that way we thought previously. So that was kind of a big news for me. For example, like the minister said, Finland drops about 19 places in the index when the planetary pressures are taken into account. And I think United States lost even 45 places. And also, according to the report, and like Pedro said, there are no countries that have achieved very high human development without harming the planet. So this sort of gap or imbalance in what we think what is development, it was quite big, and that was the kind of surprise for me. And it made me think that I think that in the media we should analyze and discuss more about the whole concept of development and be more critical about it, because traditionally development is seen in the media as economic development. If there is a new factory or a new shopping center, that's usually considered good news, because we are always looking for economic growth and jobs and things like that. So I think that based on this report, we should start questioning more about the definition of the whole development and start seeing things more through the lens of sustainable development and not just in the point of view of economy.
Thank you. Very, very brilliant points from both of you. Very, very, very good ones. And I think that we can really come back on that. Definitely, I think that this educational aspect is an important one, and that's really related on these behavior changes, what Pedro you mentioned, and the social norms in the beginning, and then from the Teija's point of this, what is the definition of the development? I think that we should definitely update a little bit our jargon and our images and definitions. What do we mean on all that? But those are the points what we can definitely follow a little bit later when we are having the Q&A session on there. So thanks a lot for both of you so far. And then we are moving on the second part of this panel, and I'm happy to again invite two ladies. So we have quite gender balance here in the panel today. So I'm inviting Ellen Ojala, who is the Youth Climate Delegate and Climate Activist, and then Anu Harkki, who is the Emerita Research Director, Climate Reality Speaker, and Climate Grandparent. So we will have the two, let's say, the generational aspects on the picture as well. So over to Ellen first.
Yes, hi, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going straight to business. So what surprised me the most in the report was the fact that even if we look at all the Nordic countries, so all 5 of them, Finland is actually the one doing the worst. We're doing the worst job. So as much as I'd like to be proud of what we're achieving and how well we're containing this crisis, it's not something that I can honestly say, because Sweden and Denmark both rose on the chart when we were looking at the new way of looking at things. And Finland, Norway, and Iceland all dropped massively on the scale. So Finland went down 19 points, and it was already at place 11. So that shows us, and that really should be telling us something, that Sweden and Denmark, both which are considered welfare states, Nordic welfare states, are doing better than Finland currently. So is Norway, and I think Iceland was too. So what we should be learning about this is that it is possible to build and sustain a Nordic welfare state while not destroying the nature and the climate meanwhile. And I think what we should be doing about it is really just changing the norm. And I don't like the narrative that the youth should be doing something. As we've seen before COVID hit, it's the youth that are actually doing the most currently. So I dislike the narrative that youth is the one who should be taking steps, because we're already there in the streets taking the steps. It's not the youth that I'm worried about. It's the parents and the grandparents. It's the older generations that worry me. So it's not a youth issue, it's an everyone issue. So to just say that youth should start worrying about their own futures, that's unfair, because it's not fair that the youth who have contributed the least to this crisis have to take the most responsibility in fixing them. So I point out that this is an everyone issue, and it needs, everyone has contributed to it here in the global north, so everyone will be needed in fixing it too.
Thank you, Ellen. I think that was really a strong statement, and perhaps sending the ball to Anu, who is representing for the climate grandparents as well. So over to you, Anu.
Thank you, Rilli, and nice to be here. Nice to meet everyone. Yes, first I want to thank UNDP for an exceptional, I think, very excellent report. And reading it, I felt that the most interesting part of it is the emphasis on the need of change of social norms and values. Because incentives for change and technology, they have been very much discussed and emphasized so far, but they not really are enough for these big changes we need. Researchers have already for years told us that the human behavior-linked social changes are of utmost importance in order to fulfill the needed changes in our lifestyle all over the world. And this is the case for both the planetary and the social imbalance. I would also like to emphasize that climate change is now really the major, most hazardous planetary imbalance. And of course, it's because of us human beings. Hence, in trying to find human development to rebuild this world by choosing values like justice and sustainability, I would like to pinpoint solutions to climate change. If, according to Paris Accord, we are successful in mitigating the climate change to 2 degrees of global temperature average by 2050, even with this very successful mitigation, the desertification, drinking water and food scarcity will remain and get worse decade by decade. And the most vulnerable areas in Middle East, Africa, North America, South America, Australia, this is of course a major issue. This is bound to create mass movements like the Arab Spring. And the researchers have already seen that it may be around 1 billion climate refugees by 2050, moving to places like Europe and north part of the globe. So the climate refugee phenomenon, it's an example, it's a good example of planetary imbalance, which is increasing social imbalance. And we should avoid all this. We should maximally mitigate the climate change. We should maximally support the most vulnerable areas. And we should support biodiversity and the natural systems. And in order to make humanity to act, we really need create novel social norms and values. As we are now, we are probably not acting enough. And what would be then be the major role of climate activists and climate grandparents in addressing this challenge? I have been for 5 years talking to citizens about climate change. And I have seen that people really don't know enough of this, enough of the harmful things that follow with the climate change. And everybody knows the term, but really the potentially catastrophic implications not. So people need real knowledge in easy to understand words and ways. And I think that this could be an important part for climate activists, as they already do a lot of this. But at the same time, we all need encouragement, we need hope, and we need optimism. And spreading all this knowledge, courage, and hope, understanding that actually the future might be much more healthy and better in many ways if we act early enough, spreading this information and understanding the task and role of climate activists and grannies. Thank you.
Thank you, Anu, and thank you for noting about this positive aspect, because I think it's super important really that we keep that aspect on mind, because that is anyway somehow the fuel or the engine for all of us as a human beings. So definitely we need to keep that aspect on mind. So thanks a lot for all of you four. Perhaps I could give the floor to Pedro to comment any of these points what the panelists made. But at the same time, I'm encouraging the audience or participants now, please put your questions to the chat box, and then we will try to pick up some of those for the panelists, and of course the panelists see those as well. So yeah, please do that. Over to Pedro first.
Thank you so much. Really, I just want to thank for the very thoughtful and inspiring comments from everyone. There are many things I could comment on, but let me just pick a few, perhaps in the form of a question to Elina. You mentioned the importance of the scientific and academic community, and the report is very heavy in conveying information about what we understand to be the latest science, not only natural sciences, but also reflecting how this concept of the Anthropocene has engaged the social sciences, the humanities, historians, anthropologists, archaeologists. And Anu, to your point, in part this is because we are convinced, as you are, that even though people do have a general notion about the dangers and the risks, it's important to provide more information to feed the public debate and public reasoning. Sometimes this makes it for a report that may be a bit dry, but we felt that it was important to put that information out there. But Elina, my question to you is the extent to which it's important to engage also with other ways of knowing. And for instance, the way in which indigenous peoples relate to nature, and the report has quite a lot about it, and speaks of the importance of having a dialogue between science, broadly defined, and indigenous people. So I wanted to have your view on that. There are some initiatives already taking place in New Zealand, for instance, that I think are quite promising. Then on the importance of social norms as being perhaps the most novel element, I do think that is the case, because incentives, nature-based solutions are fairly known, but the potential power of social norms, I think has been not recognized enough. And Helen, to your point about the role that youth has been playing in social mobilization, is a reflection of the way in which social norms can change. It's one of the triggers. Really, you mentioned education. Again, education is central. Not education in the technocratic sense of kids learning their math and their reading, but seeing education as a space to develop critical reasoning. And that's why education is part of our Human Development Index. But in the Human Development approach, education is has more than instrumental value of making people able to be productive in the economy. That is important, obviously, but it's more than that. So harnessing education also to over time shift social norms. And education here is not only children's education. It's educationally broadly understood as a way of instilling the spirit of critical reasoning and understanding. Also because this is important also to connect this idea of planetary imbalances and the risks that we've been discussing with the issue of inequalities, which is central. And Teija mentioned the inter-country differences and the differences that the new experimental index provides. But the report actually emphasizes as much inequalities between groups that are manifested in every country. So I mentioned already the differences between men and women, and there are many examples of differentiated impact across men and women in the report, but also groups that are systematically marginalized, racial and ethnic minorities in many countries. Anu spoke about forced displacement, how some of the most vulnerable people around the world are actually suffering from forced displacement linked to natural hazards that are being exacerbated for climate change. So this notion of inequality, not only looking at cross-country analysis, which is important, but understanding what's happening within all of our societies is also critical. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. Very, very, very good points what you raised. Perhaps I could take a couple of questions here from the chat box, and then there are a couple of points directly coming to the Pedro, and then one question to Teija, at least so far. So let's start with this. There's quite a lot of discussions about the degrowth as some kind of solution. So perhaps I could read about this first question from here. It's increasingly proposed degrowth as one of the few strategies that can enable rich countries to move closer and stay within the planetary boundaries. And this strategy requires that these countries abandon growth and shift to the post-capitalistic economic models. So what's, Pedro, is your opinion about this and the degrowth as a strategy? So perhaps we can start with that. And I'm just giving you a couple of seconds to think about the answer. And then at the same time, Teija, there was a question when you mentioned about this development, and we must redefine the development. So any further ideas about that? What could be the definition for that? So perhaps we can start now with Pedro and then Teija, and then rest of the panel, if you would like to pick up any of the other panelists or Pedro's comment or these questions. So I will give you the floor a little bit later on that. Let's start with Pedro.
Thank you, Rilli. That's a very good question. And in the report, we do discuss and engage with this debate around the growth. I think the fundamental point from a human development perspective and the way in which we approach these reports is to reaffirm the centrality of people-centered development. So 30 years ago, when the concept of human development was proposed, the core idea was that economic growth is not the end. It's an instrumental, something that is instrumental to enable people to meet their aspirations. So the approach we take in this report is very much informed by that concept that growth is important, instrumental, and is driven by, going back to the points that Anu make, by our values and by what we aspire to be in life. So we take the view that it is important to continue to expand opportunities for people. That is central for human development. It's important for people to have jobs, to have incomes, to be able to live lives with dignity. And the economy is important, and growing economies, especially in developing countries, are important elements to enable for that to happen. But that's not the whole story. And there are many different ways in which this can be achieved, including by taking advantage of opportunities that actually ease planetary pressures. So that's the angle we take on this issue, really. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for that. So then Teija.
Thank you. So I think I don't have a direct answer on to how to redefine the whole concept of development. It's maybe too much, but I think what we could do in the media is to, well, first start thinking about more broadly and kind of take sustainable development with all of its dimensions as a cross-cutting theme behind all the news topics. So whenever there is some kind of news piece we are doing, we should ask ourselves, what does this mean in the point of view of this society, but also what about the other people outside our country? What does it mean in the point of view of the environment? So that will somehow question the whole point of the article. Why am I doing this? Is there something negative, something positive about it? So start thinking about a bit more broadly than just that this is a good news for Finland because that this new factory is going to bring us jobs. So maybe a broaden the views a bit could be a good start. Of course, the challenge is that sustainable development is such a wide concept and very often things are complex. So it's very hard to take into account every possible dimension of sustainable development when you are trying to do a short news article in a short time. But maybe this kind of asking ourselves more questions would be a good start.
I think that's very good advice for all of us, because is the part of the learning as well, that we are never ready on that way, but we need to find the balance how to really can still do something on that side. I think that's good point to go on. Perhaps Anu, you would like to comment either the other panelists or the questions or anything what's up to your mind at the moment.
Well, yeah, one thing that that puts me thinking in Finland is the use of forests here. Of course, we have had a lot of discussion about this, and this somehow links also to Teija's mention about the new factories and so forth and the investments. I see that in Finland we see the future in a channeled way, very narrow possibilities, only new sort of investments for the old-fashioned factories that we have had, like cellulose and so forth. We just name it now biotechnology, which is not really the case. If we would understand better and see the future of humanity, there's many different roads to walk nowadays. We don't have to use the old solutions to create jobs for people. So I don't know, talking to politicians, I understand their task is difficult. They try to maintain the status quo and the good position of Finland, but we definitely need new kind of thinking and the young people to join the society and take us to new roads. So I think degrowth is necessary. We are already using the natural resources exceeding the planetary balance. It's the only choice for humanity, and we just have to do better work in the future.
Thank you very much. Ellen, what's your reflection about these comments?
Yeah, I spotted a comment about decoupling in these questions and answers. Someone asked, is there enough evidence to back up the claim of decoupling economies from materials consumption? I think that's a good question. My personal opinion is that no, there's no evidence that such a decoupling could be possible, and we need to take into account the situation we are in now and act accordingly. So we can't continue acting like we trust in those technologies. We can't base our trust in technologies that may come someday. We need to act with the knowledge and all the resources that we have now. So we can't all this talk about green growth and green recovery. In my personal opinion, it's not possible. And I think it's just if we achieve some economic growth while we're doing these necessary changes to our society, then good. so be it. That's good. But we need to shift the focus from economic growth to keeping our planet habitable.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for that absolutely great statement. Elina, over to you.
Yes, I would like to contribute and maybe add to what Pedro earlier said, that yes, we have different knowledges available. We do have knowledges, and we have to understand that knowledge is not one thing. And I think, yes, scientific knowledge is complicated, and the more we know, the more we know that we know very little about how to solve things or even to identify the problems. And that is a challenge, being working with scientists. And I think when it comes then to issues that we can do and how we can change education is also, for instance, collaborate with youth engagement movements, not against them, and but with them. And one issue that has evidence, that we do have evidence of, is, for instance, citizen science and such approaches where we actually work and collaborate with citizens from early childhood education. We do have evidence even from here in Finland, more so even from Sweden, that when young children explore things in the environment, they feel the responsibility for the environment and for themselves. There's less bullying when children go outdoors and explore things together. And we do know that there's also possibilities for intergenerational learning, so that we do involve people of different ages in learning and contributing knowledge and collaborating with researchers. And our scientist colleagues do tell us also that children often have very good questions when it comes to science and very simple issues that we take for granted. And this kind of dialogues do develop the sense of shared knowledge, shared understanding, but it also challenges us in the academia to also explain things that we think are there and everybody knows about. And we fail, as somebody points out here in the question and answer chat, that yes, we fail to communicate the findings that we do have in an efficient way to the politicians, to the ministers, to our fellow colleagues maybe from different disciplines. And then that the same concerns education. Education systems change very slowly. And I think we need to be very brave in Finland. We claim that we have the best education in the world, well, according to some criteria. If you look at the Human Development Report, according to some other criteria, not so good, because we could do better. We have the resources, we have a lot of knowledge available, and we can certainly do much better. So I think we have to be more ambitious. And this is my message to the Finnish government. Encourage more collaboration, but also be more ambitious with the goals that we set forward, also within education. We now talk about continuous learning. We talk about learning from early child education to whatever age. And then having this good system in place, we need good leaders also, good leadership training, good leadership education, and people who care, who really care for humanity, but also care for the planet. And this is less complex than what we think. And I think learning responsibility is one of the things that I'm very much interested in. And I think when we talk about learning about responsibility and learning for responsibility, we certainly do need everybody. And from the academic side, I think we really have to engage, not to talk about youth engagement, but engage with the youth or engage with the older generations, and including young children as well, to really develop a community that cares. And I think this is what we need to do. And this is creating, not to say that these are the new social norms, like I referred to what Pedro you said earlier. Yes, we do need the social norms. How do we develop social norms? How do we invent new social norms? Knowledge does not change us, but it is the experience combined with knowledge and co-creation of knowledge. And these are the ways people often talk about attitudes, and I don't sort of think that we need to talk about that. We need to talk about values and experienced values, that we exercise that. And that is something we can also learn from indigenous knowledges around the world.
Thank you. Thank you very much for these absolutely great points, all of you. But of course, the clock is always against us, and we still have the one speaker here on my list. I'm happy to invite Jan Wahlberg, who is exactly the Finnish climate ambassador, and perhaps you could also would like to reflect a little bit from your point of view during the couple of minutes. How does it look like, the whole report and the discussion what we just have had? So over to you, Jan.
Thank you very much, Rilli, and thank you for the fascinating discussion. It's a difficult role. I think fascinating discussion, and it's said in the report, Pedro, I think that one of the crucial actors is governments, because we have the formal authority, but we cannot do it alone. It's too complex for us. So we need social mobilization and pressure. So I think I've been taking careful notes, and just a very quick read. I very much agree with Teija and Ellen who on economic growth. I think in the report it says that it's a means nowadays. It's not an end. And Anu really framed it well. We need to look at values, institutions, the planet, and social imbalances. I think it's a brilliant analysis with social justice, intergenerational. My Swedish colleague always likes to remind that, including the Swedish minister, that we are lending now future generations money for, I think it's 12,000 billion in green recovery from COVID. So this element of social justice, and you very nicely call it actually just transformation, because my colleagues, we call it often just transition. And I think there is a difference here. It reminds me of Cristina Figueiras. She reminded me in one panel that she doesn't like the word build back better, which all the governments are using, because we are building forward. We are doing a transformational thing. Your green aspirational destination in this angle that no country has reached, I think it's very inspiring. And I think that the whole tool, I think that Teija was right, that this is the biggest novelty, that this is first approach to having a real kind of planetary pressure index for human development. And if I was right, there are two elements: cost of carbon and material footprint. On the cost of carbon, you remember prices and regulations, and especially fossil fuels. We are working very hard. I think it's kind of Danish-led, but Sweden, Denmark, Netherlands, and Finland, we are spreading the word. We call it transition from coal to carbon. And I think it's now part of the European narrative. The foreign ministers, they just met on Monday, and it's part of their conclusions. We had a meeting with John Kerry on Friday, and he also said that he likes very much this concept of transition from carbon to fuels. So just the fact that I think this what you said, mechanism of changes, these prices and regulations, it's an important topic, and it reflects in my work. You said also the third, look at nature as opportunity. I think the whole topic of nature-based solutions, just my previous meeting was with the Ilmatieteen Laitos, with Meteorological Agency, and then we are just coming out of adaptation summit where Minister Skinnari, he promised 5 million euros for it's called early warning mechanisms. How do we adapt to climate change? And I think Finland knowledge, we all know Petteri Taalas, and then all the ecosystem we have, it's something that we can especially work in kind of nature-based solutions. It's a global agenda, and I think Finland, especially meteorology, also forest, like Anu and you were pointing out, I think we need to do more. We are a forest country, and then we can have a bigger profile in forest in our climate diplomacy. I'm going backwards here, your ways forwards, and I think very nicely you said they are not recommendations, because it's not recommendations to governments or actors, but they are more like mechanism of change. So I mentioned prices and regulations and nature-based solutions. Your first one was social norms. Just one reflection, I started as a climate ambassador in last April, and my longest trip, my job has been taking number 4 tram to the center from Munkkiniemi. So it's also kind of a new social norm, because as a climate ambassador, the image I had, I would be having fancy meetings in kind of global arenas. But I think what the climate ambassador needs to do today, it's need to adapt to the needs we have and the discussions we have. And I thank you for the opportunity, because I think you had Academia Press, Ellen as a young, strong voice. I know Ellen well, and then Anu also representing he said grandparents of the climate. I think it's important for me as a representative of the government to hear your talk, and I just thank, and this was just a quick reflection on how it relates to my work, and I think we can do a lot more things together with Fingo and UNDP. So thanks for the invitation.
Thank you, Jan. And I think that thanks also about the Finnish government contributions to that, and really, I think that showcase as well that definitely all the actors are really needed in the same business what we are doing, because I think that the clock is definitely ticking against on us, and I think that we need to speed up, and I think that there came a lot of good examples on that how could we really do that. And I think that really I was writing here that we need some kind of popularization of the whole topic, so that those who are not really paid or just powered or really contributed by heart in this work, yet we need to increase that amount of that number of the people to come to the same spirit and some work on that, where exactly the communication is super it's really the key aspect on that, all kind of communication. We need to really understand that what the researchers are telling to us, but we need to also communicate, like Anu told us, that people don't really get it. It's in theory so far for the people, and I think that this is really our common job to make it more understandable, the whole point on that. And I hope that this 1 hour together make us more comfortable to talk outside on that. It hopefully gives inspiration for us to use the report, and really referring also about the very, very good comments. Thank you from the audience. I think that, of course, we couldn't really go through all of those, but definitely all of those have been recorded, and we're going to come back on those. So thanks a lot for your contributions. Special thanks, of course, to Pedro, who made the very good introduction on the report. All the panelists, thanks a lot. Also, Ambassador Jan Walberg as well. Thank you, UNDP as well, to really asking us to join with you from Fingo to this same journey. I think we really make the good hour. We could be proud of all of us about this session, and hopefully it really inspires us to move on that. So with these words, thank you very much, all of you, and I do hope that you can still have at least if you're based in Finland, go outside for a couple of minutes. It's still daylight there, so just inspiring about the snow and all of that what we're having. But please remember these points, what we just discussed, and really have a little bit chat tomorrow, perhaps your colleagues, whoever they are, and think about what you could do with this report and these discussions, what we just today had. Thank you very much from my side.